This is going to be a fun-filled and lots of information meeting tonight. So we'll go as long as we go. Probably between 8 and 8:30. We'll sign off. So I'm Lulu Sage. I'll be moderating. Randy is the host with the most. So when we sent out the blast, we're looking for about 3 to 5 people for an advisory board. And that's basically so that Randy and I aren't doing it alone. And, you know, this is a club, and we want to get other people's input and other people involved in it. So we're asking people to contact Randy at abqbeeks@gmail.com. Let him know, and we'll have some kind of a little Zoom meeting or something to talk about what that all means. So let us know tonight if you're interested, if you want, and we'll go from there. So we have a little time, you know, and then downtime's coming, but, you know, but in the meantime, let's start working on getting a little group together. Okay? So does anyone have any other announcements before we start?
Well, one thing that I think we should talk about is the difference between Top Bar and Langstroth.
Yeah, we will be. We are going to have 2 Top Bar people talking and a Lang person talking.
Right.
Basically about the same thing, getting ready for winter.
Right.
So we'll talk about that. And there's going to be lots of time for people to ask questions.
Okay.
Okay. So any questions, any other comments before we start? Okay, we're going to get right into the information. So Jessie couldn't make it tonight, but she made a presentation about some basic information about checking out your bees, see what's going on, and helping them to get ready for fall and winter. Believe it or not, they're already looking to that time. They're a couple of seasons ahead of us. So I hope everyone's enjoying the monsoons. I am. My ground is usually hard pan, and it's actually kind of springy now, so I'm really enjoying walking on it. So anyway, my flowers are doing their second bloom, my shrubs and stuff, so it's all good. So we're in summer right now. Bees are already in fall, winter mode, going towards that time. So Randy, you want to start Jessie's presentation?
Yes, and I am going to I'm going to mute everybody while we listen to Jessie. And after Jessie's presentation, if you have a question, then if you click on the participants button on Zoom, you can raise your hand, and we'll call on you, and you unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question. It's kind of, those of you who have been working from home know the pitfalls of a meeting like this. People are talking and don't realize they're on mute. So, but we'll mute everybody, and then if you would like to ask a question, then click on the participants button and click on raise your hand, and we'll call on you. All right.
Hi, my name is Jessie Brown. I'm the former president of the New Mexico Beekeepers Association, and I was also the co-chair of the ABQ Beeks. I was hoping to be here with you all tonight to talk about Top Bar Hive maintenance, but my girls have just joined Scouts, and they've been working really hard all summer, and this is the evening that they'll be receiving all their awards for merit badges, and my oldest daughter just became first class, so it's a really exciting night for our family. And as much as I would love to be there with you all, I really need to be there for my kids. But that being said, we're trying something new where I'm going to try recording this PowerPoint presentation about winterizing your top bar hives. Now, this seems like a crazy subject to talk about right now. It's the end of July, we're all wearing shorts, I'm sunburned from working in my garden, but believe it or not, your bees are already preparing in earnest to get ready for the winter. Starting on summer solstice, June 21st, this is the longest day of the year at 14 hours, 31 minutes of daylight from 5:52 a.m. to 8:24 p.m. This is the longest day of the entire year. And that also means that the bees have the most sunlight in the year, and so they have the longest day that they can search for honey and pollen and resources for the beehive. After that point, the days are getting shorter, and our hives are prepping for the winter. The queen is beginning to slow down the amount of eggs she is laying, and the hive is beginning to contract. Now you might be asking yourself, when does beekeepers' winter begin? And this answer depends on when the first frost is for your area. Now, usually the frost is recorded specifically in Albuquerque at the Sunport Airport, and that's usually around Halloween, October 31st, but this can be later for different parts of the city and even the state. Usually that frost is the second week of October in the East Mountains, and it could even be later down in southern New Mexico. So at that first frost, basically, plants throughout the summer are also making food, storing food, and depending on the type of plant, determines whether it will survive over winter. Annuals complete their life cycle in one season, and they die when winter comes, but their seeds remain and they're ready to sprout in the spring. Perennials lives are larger than 2 years, and deciduous trees all lose their leaves during winter. So basically most plants over winter lose their leaves, they don't have any flowering bodies, and plants are no longer producing food for the bees to store. No more nectar, no more pollen, and the bees, just like these plants, have to subsist on their stores over winter. There are several resources that a honeybee hive needs to survive the winter. They need lots of honey, they need lots of pollen, they need that honey and pollen to be set in specific areas. We'll talk about that a little bit later. They need a very good amount of bees, worker bees, to help continue to care for young bees that are emerging from their cells. They need a queen bee to survive the entire winter. They don't need drone bees. Drones are actually kicked out of the hive around September, October. They're considered the reproductive part of the year, usually in the springtime, and they're just an energy suck. So bees will actually pull drones out and bar their entry into the hive, and the drones will not survive over the winter. So one of the first things I learned as a new beekeeper is that worker bees live 5 to 6 weeks, right? 5 to 6 weeks, worker bees emerge, they live 5 to 6 weeks, and then they die out in the field. What if I were to tell you that that isn't necessarily the case over winter? There is a certain type of worker bee called a fat bee. Now, fat bees are made in the fall, and that is when the queen reduces her laying of bees. The number of eggs that is produced and is laid decreases, but the hive numbers are still really big. There's lots and lots of worker bees. And the worker bees, quite honestly, run out of jobs to do. So they have lots of food coming into the hive, and what do? They end up stuffing baby bees full of food. So these little larvae are just absolutely the queens of the castle. They've been having pollen, honey stuffed in their bellies. The levels of fat in their bodies, in the hypopharyngeal glands, their internal pollen storage is absolutely stuffed to the gills. And I just love this name, fat bees. These are the bees that are going to survive over winter. And believe it or not, these bees can live to be 6 months. So their lifespan is long enough to survive over the winter months. So this is something to keep in your mind. And the end of fall, your hives need to be really well fed. They need to have lots of pollen. They need to have lots of honey coming in. If the bees themselves aren't bringing in these resources, you really need to help supplement these hives, because you need these fat bees to survive over winter. I touched upon this briefly earlier, but your beehive needs to be set in a very specific sequence over the winter. Now, the best sequence is kind of like in this image that I've got right here. Now, this is a top bar hive, just a generic image of a hive. And over here on the left is a white box. We're going to assume this is the entrance on one side of the hive or the other. It could be at the end, it could be on the left-hand side, but just assume that your hive entrance to your beehive, your top bar beehive, is on one side. Now, the way that honeybees usually set up their winter stores is at the entrance or close to the entrance. You begin with 1 bar, maybe 2 bars of honey and pollen. And then in the middle of that area is your brood chamber. These dark bars represent that brood chamber right there, where most of the babies are born, emerge. This is where the bees take care of their young. And at the very top of these bars, they have honey and pollen storage. And then this brood chamber is followed by maybe 2, 3, many more bars of honey, and then an empty comb after that. So when you look in your beehive, this is kind of how you will see that your bees have set up. It's really important that you don't mess up this organization. And this has happened to me in the past, where I might have a bunch of bees on one side of the hive and honey stores are too far back. Those bees, if you think about it, it's a very cold day. They're not going to go in search of honey. They're not going to break their little nest of bees in search of honey and pollen. That honey and pollen needs to be really close to the winter cluster. So that cluster usually hangs out in this area that is all brown throughout the winter, slowly working around, going around in concentric circles, eating their food and their stores. In that last slide, I mentioned that bees set their honey and their pollen and their resources in a very specific pattern. And the reason for that is honeybees do not heat up the entire hive over winter. In fact, they only heat up their winter cluster. They're kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen any documentaries about penguins, how penguins take turns being on the inside of a bundle and they go out to the outside and they take turns heating the inside of the hive. Well, here in this picture we have an overwinter cluster. And as you can see, now this is all in Celsius, not in Fahrenheit, but this center of this ball of bees is really, really warm, usually around 94 degrees. That's the temperature that brood need in order to be healthy and come out of their cells healthy. And as you go out further and further around this circle, it becomes colder and colder and colder. And this here is the outside temperature on this exterior. So these bees are not heating their entire beehive. They're only heating that inner cluster of bees. And so they're not going to break this cluster to go in search of food. They are going to stay within this cluster, taking turns, rotating out, eating their stores, going around as a big ball of bees. So you don't have to heat your hive. You don't have to put blankets on your hive. You don't have to put heaters on your hive. Your hive will be just fine the way it is. You might decide that you want to put up some wind breaks. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but keep that in mind. They don't heat up the entire hive. They're only heating their individual cluster. Here's something that's interesting to know. Everybody poops. I don't know if you've seen that children's book, read it to your kids, read it to your grandkids, but basically everyone poops. And so bees actually hold their feces when it's really cold. They're pretty clean creatures. They don't want to go to the bathroom inside their own hives. So you'll actually notice that in the winter months, when it starts to warm out, you'll have the bees leave the hives and go on cleansing flights, and they will poop outside the hive. This is something to keep in mind, especially if you have a beehive in front of, say, your laundry line. You might find little yellow poops all over your laundry, or the area in front of the hive. You might find these little yellow splatters everywhere. That's totally natural, nothing to worry about. Everybody poops. They hold it when it's really cold, and those warm days, they're going to go out on their cleansing flights. So something you might see in the hive is something called propolis. And it looks a little bit like this. It's a little bit yellowish, greenish, maybe brownish, and it looks like little sticky clumps. Now, propolis is incredible. Bees go out, worker bees go out, they fill their pollen pockets with it. It's really sticky. It's so sticky, in fact, that they need all their little sister bees to help pull it off, and they pack it into holes. Propolis is antifungal, antimicrobial. It's incredible stuff. We have huge resources of propolis here in New Mexico, so they can totally find it anywhere. And they use it to actually coat the entire interior of their hive. I've actually heard from certain resources that it's good to rough up the interior of your hive to encourage bees to actually lay propolis around all the edges and along the surfaces of your hive. Bees, in fact, will sometimes encase things inside the hive that is too big for them to pull out. My friend Megan once had a mouse die inside her hive, and the bees had totally encased this dead mouse in propolis to entomb it so that that mouse wouldn't infect the rest of the hive. Now, over winter, bees will pack this propolis in all the holes in their hive. Bees are incredible architects. They know what kind of ventilation they need, so they are putting this propolis in very specific manners. And you do have to be careful, especially in winter, getting in and breaking that propolis seal that they've laid so specifically. But you also have to make sure that there's enough airflow inside the hives. If you think about it, you've got a large soccer ball size of bees that are exhaling, and their exhales are releasing water droplets into the air. Those water droplets go up to the ceiling of the hive, and then they can start dripping down on the hive itself. So they need really good ventilation, because those water droplets can mold the hive. I don't know if you've ever been in a hive that, it got moldy and gross over the winter, and it's pretty yucky. There's mold on the actual combs themselves. The hive is wet. So you definitely want to avoid this, but you have to believe in your bees' ability to pack propolis where they need it in the hive to get good amount of ventilation. This is kind of an unclear picture, but I wanted to show you the entrance to this beehive that has all these multiple holes. They're just big enough for one bee each, and this is all made with propolis. These bees have created these complex entryways and exits out of their hive, and they are ready for winter. One thing you can do going into winter is look at the placement of your hives and look at the amount of wind that they get. If your hives are in a very exposed location, you might want to consider putting up wind breaks so that that wind doesn't come in and just suck all that heat out of that winter cluster. I love this. This is an overenthusiastic windbreak. You don't have to go this extreme. Just a hay bale on one side of the hive that's getting a lot of the wind can really make a big difference. But it's up to you and your own individual location. The next month or two is a great time to assess the health of your hive and determine if it will survive the winter. So when you go into your top bar hive, visualize, does your beehive have 12 bars of honey and pollen, brood, Is the queen still laying in tight concentric circles? If the answer to all of these questions is yes, yes, and yes, then your hive is ready for winter. Now, what about when you look into your hive and it only has, say, 4 bars of honey and pollen and bees, and the queen is not laying, she's laying in a very kind of a scattered pattern, lots of holes in between her laying? You might consider combining hives at this point. Now, combining hives means that the weak hive, you go in and you actually kill that queen, because the likelihood of this hive surviving over the winter is very low. So, to make a combination, you go into that weaker hive that only has 4 bars of honey, you look for the queen and you kill her. I know, it's really tough, but it has to be done. You then go back to the bigger hive that has 12 bars of honey and pollen and bees, or maybe even 6 bars. You know, you want to try and get a total of 12 bars of honey and pollen and bees. So if you have 2 hives that have 6 bars each, you might also consider combining them. Now in this picture, there is some wet newspaper here that has been laid. You can use 1 to 2 pieces of wet newspaper, and the hive is here to the back entrance, the full hive with all the bees and everything, and you fold your newspaper just like this to make kind of a closed gateway. And then you take that weaker hive that you killed the bee, the queen bee, and you put it behind this newspaper. Now, that weaker hive that you killed the queen won't survive the winter. The queen is no longer laying eggs. They won't survive on their own, so it's really important that they combine with the stronger hive. So this newspaper is making it so that the bees have to take some time to chew through the newspaper. And by the time they have chewed all the way through that newspaper, these hives start smelling like each other, and that those bees begin to accept each other a lot easier. So this is one technique for combining hives going into winter. So you will then, at the end of the bees chewing through this newspaper, you'll have 1 full hive with an increase of bees, an increase in brood, an increase of pollen and nectar, and it has a much better likelihood of surviving the winter. You can go in, and after this has happened, they've chewed through this newspaper, you just go in and you clean out all those residual paper pieces inside that hive. Now that I told you that you need to combine your hives, we're going to do something the opposite. We're actually going to break the rules a little bit. Sometimes small hives will do just fine overwintering, and they're called overwintering nucs. This means you overwinter a much smaller hive, and so next spring the queen begins ramping up, starts laying a lot of bees, and it just explodes. Now, overwintering nucs is something that you can do in your own top bar hive. When I was in the bee yards with Les Crowder, he would actually he would overwinter his hives together. So he would put a board in the middle of a hive that is impenetrable from side to side. He would have an entrance on one side of the hive, say this is a purple entrance, and on the other side this is a light green entrance. So he would combine hives into one beehive. He'd have one hive to the left, one totally different hive to the left, to the right, one hive on the left, one hive on the right, and those bees would live together. They each had their own queen, they each had their own bees and resources, and it just made it a lot easier for him to move hives. The nice thing with overwintering nucs is that they might survive the winter and then absolutely thrive and flourish the next year. So this is kind of the art of beekeeping. You know, in the last slide I told you you need to combine weak hives or combine a weak hive with a strong hive. In this slide, if you have a strong queen that's doing really well, and she's got honey, she's got resources, but maybe she only has 6 bars of honey and total resources inside there, you might want to try letting her overwinter all by herself. You don't necessarily have to make a whole hive for her or combine the hives. You can just leave her in the hive itself. But these small overwintering nucs, you got to make sure that the entrances are very, very small. Only one bee can enter and leave at a single time. And the reason for that is these smaller, weaker hives have a hard time protecting their honey and resources from other hives. So you have to make sure that they can guard their own entrances. So going into winter, you have made sure that you have combined week hives. You have made sure that your hives have plenty of resources. They have at least 12 to 14 bars of honey, pollen, about a soccer ball shape size of bees. The queen is laying tight concentric circles. She looks healthy and good to you. Maybe you've put up a windbreak to protect that hive if you're in a really windy area. Your hive is now ready for winter. So what do you do at this point? Well, winter is a great time for building new equipment, making sure to order your package bees around the new year. That's my own internal reminder, like, oh, I'm gonna get packages. I better put in my order quickly, otherwise bees are gonna sell out. So make sure and put in your orders by around January or February in 2021. You're also assessing whether your beehive has outgrown your property. You might have started out with maybe 1 or 2 beehives in your backyard, but now you're approaching closer to like 4 or 5. You might want to consider how much room you have in your own backyard, how much an impact those bees are making in your neighborhood, and deciding whether you want to maybe meet up and join with farmers and put your hives in different areas around town so that you're not overwhelming a single neighborhood and outstripping that resources. So this would be a great time to make connections with farmers to see if you could maybe expand your apiary into different areas. So spring of 2021 has come around and you are wondering, did my hive survive the winter? Now, around February, early February, mid-February, this is when elm pollen becomes available to bees. And this is when you know your hive has survived the winter without having to look inside your hive. You'll know if your beehive has survived if bees begin coming into the hive with very light colored pollen. I drew a little white ball on the back of this bee here, representing that light elm pollen that a worker bee is bringing back to the hive. That means your hive has survived. Now I mention this because brood needs pollen to survive. So if you see bees coming into your hive around late January, early February, mid-February with pollen, that means there is brood inside that hive that those bees are feeding. So your hives have survived. If you don't see bees coming in and out with pollen by at least end of February, it means that maybe this hive has died over winter and these bees are coming in and they're actually robbing the resources out of your beehive. So something to keep an eye on. If your bees have survived, congratulations, you've done a great job. But on the other hand, if your bees did not survive, unfortunately that is kind of the world that we live in. I think beekeepers are expected to lose about 40% of their beehives each year. And if you beat those odds, congratulations, you're doing really well. But it's kind of the reality of beekeeping that we have to live with these days. I want to briefly talk about something that has become more and more important to me as I've been keeping bees now for about 14 years. I can tell because my oldest daughter is 13 and I started keeping bees before she was born, so we're going on 14 years. And that is the importance of note-taking. I personally keep notes on my cell phone as I'm in the bee yard, but I know people that take paper notes, beekeepers that actually take notes on little plastic placards that they put on each individual hive, people that take paper notes, or even people that take notes through rocks and stones that they put in very specific ways inside their hive so that they know how old that queen is, they know what that hive looks like. I like to look over my notes over the many years and determine, whether things that I did helped me or hurt me over the long run. Was it good for me to make these overwinter nucs? Did they have a good survival rate year after year? Was it helpful for me to give bees 12 bars of resources or 14 bars of resources? Was it helpful for me to do things like replacing the queen right before winter? Or what about if I happen to put maybe some treatments in a hive to help with varroa mites? These notes have been so incredibly important to me, and I really want to stress these importance, especially going into winter and having that chance to kind of look over your year and decide, did I do a good job? What could I improve next year? My personal notes are based off of SOAP notes, which is used sometimes, I think, in the medical field. And these are the questions I like to ask myself every time I'm in the hive. S in SOAP stands for subjective. So which hive? Which hive are you talking about? Make a notation of the individual hive. You might have your hives named. You might have the queens named, and you like to follow each individual queen's life. It just depends. Which hive, which queen? Objective in the SOAP. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell, touch, and taste? Are the bees being kind of aggressive today while you're in the hive? Have they been aggressive the last few times that you've been in the hive? Is it maybe a time for you to replace that queen? What does that honey taste like? You know, different types of nectar come in different times of the year. And so you can actually note that. Like right now I've got kind of a citrusy honey that I know comes from sunflowers. So you can know when you're expecting to have different types of honey in your hive. The next one is assessment. How's that hive doing? Are they healthy? Is the queen laying really well? Do they have a lot of drones at that time? And then finally, the P in SOAP plans is what now? What's your next move for your hive? Thank you so much for letting me join you remotely and virtually. I sure appreciate it. I wish I could see you all, and I really am sad to be missing this meeting. I'll try and join in if I get a chance or a lull in between the ceremony for my daughters. But I hope you have a really good winter, and I really believe in you. I think you're going to do a great, great job. And, you know, it's incredible to have all the beekeepers starting out, learning, and beginning their journey.
Well, thank you, Jessie. So she's not available to answer questions, but I think Mark's going to cover some of the same territory, and he'll be available for lots of questions. So, Mark, you ready?
Can you see me?
We can see you.
Okay, so I'm in a bee suit because I'm going to get in the hive. I'm going to talk to you about overwintering bees in smaller hives. My wife Beth and I got into doing a little bit of experimenting last year with smaller hives after we saw Tom Seeley, and he says bees don't really care for really large hives. His latest book talks about different species of bees that like different size hives. He recommends a hive that's about 40 liters, which is a little more than a deep, like it's probably a deep and a medium or something like that is about 40 liters. These top bar hives that I have a nuke here that's 12 bars. I measured the volume and it's about 30 liters in there, so it's about 10 liters short. But last year we decided to go smaller colonies. It requires a lot more maintenance because you got to look out for splits. And finally, you got to worry about splitting in the fall, and that led us to having to overwinter a nuke last year. So I'm going to switch over this camera to the front of my phone here, and my wife Beth is going to take over for me. And we're going to start talking about this nuke. This is a 12 bar.
Hey, Mark, I got a comment for our beekeepers.
Sure.
In Zoom, if you want to see, you may be looking at just small pictures of everybody. If you want to see a bigger view of Mark, if you go click on, in my case, I can click on a speaker view, and then it minimizes everyone else, and then you get a bigger picture of Mark, if that helps you out. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, so this is a 12 bar nuke right here. Now our top bars are basically crowder bars, but they're crowder hives, but they're basically a little bit deeper. So I get about 2 inches per 2 per top bar, per comb deep or in every bar. So this is the smallest nuke that I think that we would probably overwinter in. This is a 1-inch set of wood here. So if you look at the edges, you can see, let me pull it across. This is really 3/4 of an inch. They call it 1 inch, but it's plain, so it comes out 3/4 inches. Now this nuke, we overwintered a queen in here, a colony last year, because we have a 17 bar hive up in Santa Fe, and late August she decided she was gonna swarm. So we pulled about 3 bars or 4 bars out of there, you know, which isn't enough to get through the winter, but we supplemented this thing with other resources we had already saved off. And so when she was done, she had about, I'd say about 10 bars of total bees and resources in here. And then the next thing we did was we took, now I hear Jessie say not to do this, but the thing about insulation that you got to realize is it's not only good to keep heat in, it keeps heat out. And on the winters that we have lately, a lot of heat comes in on those days. And this insulation helps from getting the hive overheated. So I'm going to disagree with Jessie and tell you, in a hive like this with 1-inch wood, you want to insulate. And so that's exactly what we did. We took this, we insulated around the hive, and then just taped it all up, taped that insulation on. And if you look at our lids, they all are built with insulation on the top as well. Probably most of yours are as well. So on this hive, this nuke, one thing I will point out is I have a feeder right here. So this closes up the feeder during the winter to keep things out. And they'll propolize any tiny holes and all this. And the other thing to note is my hive entrance, our hive entrance here is much smaller. And I will actually reduce that to about right here. So it's much, much smaller there. Anyway, so that's how we do a 1-inch. But since last year, we have started moving to 2-inch wood, and we have two. I go to a lumber yard, to a sawmill, and we buy 2-inch wood, which is 2 by 12, 8 feet long, and I get 2 of those, and that builds a nice big hive with everything you need. Costs $50. That's pretty cheap. And another thing Tom Seeley says is that the bees really like rough edges, rough wood, roughing up on the inside. The nice thing about rough cut wood is actually 2 inches, and inside it is totally rough. It's already roughed for you. You don't have to do a thing. So it's kind of a nice thing to use. And I've already smoked these, so I don't think I need to smoke them anymore. Again, this guy is insulated here on top. And if you look at the top of this hive, you can see I have 2-inch wood here. We have 2-inch wood here. We have ventilation holes here and a feeder here. Now, what I didn't do on that nuke back there was I had the feeder close to the entrance. That's a mistake in the fall. The reason that's a mistake in the fall is because a lot of times there's not a lot of resources and you want to feed those bees. And the problem you have is there's a lot of robbing going on. Not only are the bees looking for more food, wasps are desperate to find more stuff, and so you get a lot of pests and stuff coming in looking for that food. And having the entrance next to having the feeder next to the entrance is kind of a mistake, because it's very hard to defend that. On this one, on all my new hives now, we've got the feeder on the back side here. So even if bees are attracted back here, they can't get in. And actually, this is exactly where they get attracted to. So it's much easier to defend. Again, I have a much smaller entrance up here in the front that we use. Let me pull out a hive tool here, and I'll show you the inside. And a few little wax moths. Oh, they're busy. Now, I don't actually know how far back she goes, but she goes back here a ways. Let's see. So her first bar is right here, and I'm pretty sure these 2 are pretty empty, or they might have something. So we'll look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 12 bars so far for the winter, which is probably okay. So she's got a couple more months to build up, which is good. We like to leave in these bars in here at least 14. Well, a lot of times we just go all the way to 18, because you can always harvest the honey in the spring. I have to say that we always find tons of honey at the end of the season. They haven't used it all. And as Jessie said, you're going to want to make sure that the honey is all in one direction. We usually put like one bar here or 2 bars of honey in the front, and then put your nest, and then all the honey, the honey and resources this way. And always we put the pollen close, any bars with lots of pollen close to the nest initially, because they're probably, just when you close them up for the winter, they might not actually be done. The other thing we have to talk about in the fall, besides just pests and that sort of thing, is can you show inside here how these hives are deep? So you can see that's a much bigger hive. These 2-inch this 2-inch wood is a much better insulator than the 1-inch wood, and this is an actual 2 inches here. So that makes a big difference. Got one, sorry. Let's just take a quick look here, shall we? Gratuitous. So this bar, this is their last bar, and that is extremely heavy. And you can see how deep those bars go. So in this hive, even though we're not, may not have a whole lot of resources, because they're deeper, those resources go a lot further. The other thing I want to tell you about using smaller nucs and smaller hives is we had some problems in the past where we had very big colonies, and then we had small varroa mite counts, and we did nothing about it. But the varroa took them over anyway, because you have fewer mites, but they're going to grow much bigger in those last couple of weeks or whatever. And she's not laying anymore, but there's a ton of bees in there, and they're just spreading disease, and they're going to die. And I've seen that happen. And we don't, having smaller colonies keeps you, you got a much better chance to get through the winter with varroa mite. Now, when you do your varroa mite tests, you should be doing them probably once every 2 months at the very least. You got to do an integrated pest management treatment. What we do like to do is brood breaks. In the spring, that's easy because splits, and smaller hives, you get a lot of brood breaks because you're splitting all the time. So that's kind of nice. So that manages the varroa really nicely. And we use other methods as well. But what you want to do is you want to do an integrated pest management, because you want to keep the mites from getting used to one kind of treatment. If you're using chemicals, especially, because you don't want to get them acclimated to whatever you're using. A lot of people use oxalic acid, formic acid, use whatever you're going to use, but you really do want to take care of your mites during the winter, before the winter comes in. Where's my smoke? I've got to get these guys in. So again, on this hive, if I'm not feeding, there's bees in here. During the winter, I never feed during the winter, because you don't want to put moisture in the hive. I'll close it up. And the nice thing about having this in here all the way in is it doesn't need to be propolized, and it doesn't cause any drafting or any of that sort of thing, that piece of wood. So they won't propolize it, and I won't have to go dig that out in the winter. I mean, in the spring. So these guys, I'm going to go ahead and close them up. I just wanted to show you what was going on in here. Now, I have vent holes here according to TJ. I want to put one on the bottom and one on the top, so that you get a draft through here, and they will propolize that whole vent. And if you're overwintering and they haven't done it, and you know what cold winter is, at the very least, take a piece of duct tape and cover it if they haven't propolized it. That'll help keep the drafts down during the winter. We've had really great luck with these 2-inch top bars, and they work they're great. They take more work because it usually takes 2 people to move them. It's not so easy to do as a one-person job, but they are totally great for the bees. The bees really like them. Okay, girls, you're gonna have to figure out your way in. And that's what we do. Did I miss anything, Beth? I think that's it. Any questions? Hello? Are they there?
I think so.
Find the formic acid mark, or oxalic acid.
What do you say?
He's talking about treatments.
I was asking about applying the formic or oxalic acid against mites. How do you do that?
Well, formic acid you can get in strips. A lot of those things are called MAC strips. And in a top bar, they tell you like in a lang, what you will do is you'll put them across the top bars of the lang medium wherever you're doing it, and treat them, and that formic acid will go down in the hive. In a top bar, if you look at them, if you look at this.
Oops. We lost audio on Mark.
Hey, Mark, you're muted on Zoom.
How's that?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
Yep.
so you can see that those top bars, they form a seal. So putting max strips on top of that doesn't do you any good. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna probably open this up some, just like you would like it was a lang. A lot of people put them on the bottom, and we did that at one time. And see, you could lay your strip right here, and then another one on the other side, and that pretty much behaves the same as a lang. We don't put them on the bottom because it's really, really hard on the bees. And so we actually stopped using them completely. Now, I'm not going to talk about oxalic acid because John's about to come on, and he's a master with that stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark.
What we've been using is lithium chloride.
Mark, we have a question from Stephen Black. Stephen, why don't you take yourself off mute and ask your question?
Hey, Mark, thanks very much. That was a great video. Actually, I have two questions. So I have two langs and a top bar. So I have one top bar. It's a less crowded design, and it doesn't have any ventilation holes in it. And so I'm thinking about adding, like you showed, a small ventilation hole on each side, because I know ventilation is very important in the winter. But then you talked about duct taping it closed. So now I'm confused. So what is the configuration in the winter time?
Ventilation is really good in the winter, but you want to add those holes now, because you got hot days, and that ventilation really helps a lot during the summer. And what the bees are going to do is, when winter starts coming around, most of the time they'll completely cover that hole with propolis. You know, especially in this nuke here that I have. Last year I had to tape it up because they didn't close up the ventilation. And so what I did is I put a piece of duct tape over about 3/4 of it and left just a piece of it open, because in the winter you get a lot of cold winds, and that kind of defeats the purpose.
but you do need some ventilation in the winter, right?
Yes, you do need some ventilation in the winter, because you've got to take the moisture out. The other thing I do to deal with moisture, though, is I take a container that fits flat in there and fill it with sugar, because that sugar acts like a moisture sink.
Okay.
And it has a dual effect that if they happen to run out of resources, they'll start eating that sugar.
That's great. So one of the quick question is, if I have one top bar, and if I'm running low on resources going into winter, is there a way to take resources from a lang hive and add it to a top bar?
No.
Do you have frames that are foundation? Then I would say that's really, really, really hard. I wouldn't do it. I would probably talk to somebody and get some resources from somebody else. It's much easier to go from a top bar to a lang than it is to go the other way.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Douglas Binder.
Great, thanks. I've got two questions as well. This is my first year keeping. I've got one top bar hive, a TJ Carr design, and we've been incredibly lucky so far. Everything just seems to be going on its own without much intervention from us. My first question is, where is this cluster of bees located in the winter? There's only so much room between the combs that they've established, and where is this mass of bees located?
It's usually wherever their nest is that's where it starts out. But that cluster will move following the resources over the winter because they want to feed. One of the problems we have here in the winters here is we get these really warm days, and they'll sometimes break that cluster. That happened to us last year. We lost the hive because of exactly that. And then we'll get these really cold snaps right away, and they won't know how to cluster back up. So it's not necessarily a static cluster. They don't stay in that thing all the time. If it warms up, they'll start to move a little bit. That's the best I can tell you. They are within whatever resources you have. That's where they'll cluster, and somewhere in the middle of that is your queen.
And they are clustering on multiple
Right.
bars too. So, you know, Jessie described it as kind of a soccer ball, but they're going to
Yeah.
be on multiple bars and all clustered together on multiple bars.
All right, that makes more sense to me. It was the soccer ball that I just couldn't understand how that would work.
Well, the bar will heat up as well. I mean, it's in a sense, it's the soccer ball's the heat sink, if you will, and those bars that they're on will heat up with the cluster.
Okay, well, that certainly makes sense. The second question I have is I'm afraid to harvest. You know, we've got I don't know. I haven't checked in 3 weeks just because, you know, we were checking a lot in the beginning. And everything, you know, there's no cross combing. We checked for mites. There was 0 mites. Everything is, you know, we figure, well, let's just leave them alone. Let them do what they obviously know what it is that they're doing. And they've got, you know, 3 weeks ago, we had, I think, 15 or 16 bars. And, you know, I figure, you know, I'm afraid to do anything.
Well, it's also a drought situation, so you want to get them through the winter.
That was my thinking. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then wait till spring and then see where we're at then, and then maybe harvest at that point.
It's a good fear. I think that's a healthy fear, and the reason is you're like basically in the middle of summer. We could have exactly like you said. There could be a drought. And they could go through those bars pretty quick.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So don't take them until I would wait till fall.
It doesn't make it past the winter. And we talk about the robber bees coming in. Can robber bees deplete the entire honey stores, or?
Yes, they can.
In a day.
Yeah.
If they can't defend their honey, it'll be gone very quickly.
If it's a weak hive to begin with, they'll just decimate it.
Wow.
In my opinion. I mean, I've been doing this for 16 years. So I would leave it alone.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
That's been our inclination. All right, thank you.
And let them try to get through the winter and then reassess it in the spring.
Okay, Amy Owens has a question. Amy Owens. Owen.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I was just going to say that, yeah, there's bars of honey between the cluster of bees. And what's neat about honey is, I think Mark said this, it holds in heat. So that's another reason why honey is so important, is it holds heat for the bees so they don't have to use as much energy to stay warm.
Thank you, Amy.
I have a question actually for the more experienced beekeepers. Is one of the things that I do in the spring is I make bee tea, and I use their own honey to make the bee tea with herbs. I don't feed them in their hive. I put it in a neutral area, and fortunately we have not had robbing situation, you know, or fighting over it.
Yeah, I think I've had to do that before, where everybody's robbing, especially when it's wasps, like yellow jackets coming in.
Oh yeah, well that comes.
I know they need to be fed, but if I put it in their hive or anywhere near their hive, they're going to start going in the hive, and so I'll put it in a place that everybody can get to it, because I'd rather feed them that way than lose a hive.
Exactly, that's what I do, and I've not had a problem with that.
Okay, we got a question from Paul.
We just combined a couple of my hives, and now there's like a whole lot of fighting going on, cleaning out the boxes. So, but I'm like, go ahead, go for it.
Okay, Joe, go ahead.
All right, so Mark, your discussion with Douglas generated an additional question than my initial one, so I'll ask that one first. You know, Douglas was asking whether he should harvest, and your response kind of suggested to me that it may be smarter to kind of leave your honey supply in there through the winter and not harvest until springtime, when you see how much it. Go ahead.
what I'm suggesting is you wait till fall is well on, because between now and fall they could go through a lot of that honey. And if they have a bunch of honey when you're in the fall, and you know they're going to make it, then just take what you need from.
Okay.
You can take at that point safely. It's just I think this is too early to be taking too much honey, especially at 16 bars. 16 bars, I wouldn't touch it. I really wouldn't.
Okay, so then my original question was, if if I have a hive that has 20 plus bars in it, do you suggest putting a follower board in order to kind of condense the hive down for the winter for heat conservation?
I've never done that. I've heard people say that helps, but I'll be honest with you. If you listen to what Jessie's talking about, those bees on the outside are going to start. They rotate themselves into the middle of the ball, and those bees are more than capable of keeping themselves warm. They don't have to keep the whole hive warm; they just have to keep that cluster warm. So
Okay.
no, I wouldn't do it. I mean, really, unless you're having some weird problem, don't fix a problem that you haven't had yet.
See,
All right.
I do put a follow board on mine. In my 29 bar, I do. Even if it's a healthy, I get it smaller and I will put a follow bar on, and it usually ends up being 15 to 20 bars. I just do that. And
Okay.
they make it, but I've also not done it in the past, but I like getting my hive a little smaller.
Okay,
So,
thanks to
that's
both
what
of
I
you.
do.
Thank
Again,
you.
Joe, ask 10 beekeepers a question and you'll get 17 answers.
Lulu, that's what I'm learning. That's what I'm learning from putting that presentation together, and that's why Randy hasn't gotten an answer from me.
Okay,
Well,
Mark, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions for Mark?
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Do the same comment apply to a long lang as opposed to a top bar? Because I'm currently building a long lang, and I'm assuming the same approaches for a top bar would apply to a long lang.
I would think you're right, but I have not ever messed with a long lang. There might be somebody on this group here who has, but probably that makes the most sense to me as well.
Okay,
Annette,
thank you.
Annette has a long lang, and I saw that she was on the Zoom meeting. Is she still there, Randy? Is Annette still there?
Annette
Maybe she can answer.
Is it Annette?
Yes.
Colbert? Yeah, she's
Yes.
still there.
Maybe she can answer that question.
Yeah, I have visited her
Okay.
her apiary to see her lang. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mark.
So I have a question that
Oh.
anyone with experience can answer. What does it mean if bees mass outside of on the front of the hive?
That's called bearding.
Right.
And they're doing that because it's too hot in the hive usually. It's usually a good sign because that means you got a lot of bees.
Yeah, there are a lot of bees.
Well, and it helps if you put a little rock or a stick or something on the top. I mean, I do Langstroth and I do top bar, but it's a good idea to put a little rock or take a bar out of the end of the top bar, and or put, if you're doing Langstroth, put a rock or a stick and raise the upper cover a little bit to give them some air.
Give it a little, like what, a half an inch or something, or?
Yeah, just yeah. That's all
Okay,
you do. Just give them some air.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
So that's what I do. And I do both, by the way. And I do both because everybody has opinions about top bar and or Langstroth, and I like trying to talk about doing both. Because there are pros and cons here in New Mexico, at least here in New Mexico. The pros and cons of what actually works. I'm in northern New Mexico, I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but
Lulu, can you see this?
Yeah, I
Sorry,
saw
I
it,
didn't mean to
Mark.
interrupt.
I saw it. Did you have any bees this year? Yep,
Yeah,
I saw
there's
it in the
about 4 or
background.
5 in here.
Yep, yep. The daughters and the sons, they're coming out now at my house, so I'm getting the next
Yeah.
generation. Love those little boys.
Yeah.
getting ready for winter.
That was a Xylocopa, the big black carpenter bees. The females are black and the males are furry and orange. I cut down a tree, it's in my driveway, and Mark got part of it. So that's what he was showing me.
Cool.
So.
Sorry for interrupting, but they're so fast, you got to do it right away.
So Mark, that was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Very nice.
We got to do this more often.
Okay, anybody have any more questions for Mark, or are we moving on to John now? John's going to talk about langs and getting them ready for winter. So, and mite testing, treating, whatever. He started his screen. Okay, thank you, John.
All right, so you guys can see my screen? Okay, so I'm John Feuerherd. I'm been keeping bees for about 5 years now. I'm on the New Mexico Beekeeper Association CERT program with Mark. I'm the treasurer for them. So some of you may have seen me present in other forums before. It's always hard following Jess, Mark, and Beth. They're such phenomenal beekeepers. So I'll try to do my best here. I'm going to cover some of the stuff that they've covered before already, but I'm going to focus really heavily on langs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you prepare for fall and winter. So there's a checklist that we'll kind of go through in a lot more detail that I follow when preparing for fall and winter. It basically goes in order of, you harvest your honey going into the fall, you check their food stores as you get further into the year, feed if the honey levels are low to make sure that they have enough food going into the winter. You check your mite levels often and execute your treatment plan that you've developed and that you're following as part of your integrated pest management program. Check for other diseases. You should always be on the lookout for a bunch of different stuff that we'll cover. Always be checking your queen. Is she healthy? Is she laying well? Is she doing everything she's supposed to be doing? Is the hive a good size? And then as you get closer and closer into winter, Jess covered this, but your bees peak in the July, late June timeframe, and then they start dwindling down in population as the season goes on. And so as you get further and further into August, September, and then October, your hive's going to be shrinking and they're going to have less bees to help protect the hive. So it's a good idea to start reducing their entrance to give them a little bit of an edge against wasp and other bees trying to rob them. And then also make sure your hive is well ventilated and protect hives from wind and moisture. So go through each one of these, starting with the honey harvest. First foremost, if you are treating mites, harvest before you treat. The vast majority of the treatments require you to have your honey supers off before you can treat. Remember always to leave the bees enough food for winter. I like to harvest later in the year. I think Mark hit on that as well. Just to make sure, if you have a big drought or we have a dearth and they're not getting a lot of nectar in, let them consume it this time of year going into winter. That way you're not having to feed them overly too much come September, October timeframe. Remember that you need to leave them 40 to 90 pounds of stores for winter. That's a lot of honey. And it depends. Warmer climates with shorter winters, 40, colder winters, colder climates are 90 pounds. So I would imagine, I don't keep bees on the East Mountain, but you probably need a lot more honey out there than I would here in the Valley. To give you a little bit of sense of what kind of amount of honey that is in a lang, a full 10 frame deep weighs about 80 to 90 pounds. If it's completely packed full of honey, that roughly comes out to about 8 pounds per deep frame and 6 pounds per medium frame. So if you're trying to target around 60 pounds, you need about 10 frames of medium frames of honey for them. If you're getting into September, August, start feeding them. And if they're low, give them 2-to-1 sugar syrup. I tend to go a little bit thicker as you get closer because it's trying to get that moisture out of the hive. I don't want to give them a lot of moisture going into October. Maybe even go to 4-to-1, possibly. That's about 25% moisture, and they want to get it obviously down to 17%. Any questions on this so far?
Where are you?
I'm in Corrales, Sommer the Valley.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm in Santa Fe, and I've kind of switched a little bit more towards the Langstroth, and so thank you.
No
I'm
problem.
in Corrales too.
How are you?
Yeah.
It's a great place to keep bees. I feel really blessed having bees down here.
I'll take your word for that. The first time I've done it.
Yeah, you're gonna enjoy it. I've had really good luck in Corrales.
Yeah. Well, they've got a lot of agriculture too, which is cool.
Absolutely.
So.
My levels is another big one. I do a lot of presentations on varroa mite management, so I'm going to keep this short. I have a whole nother deck on this, but those of you who know me, I'm a big stickler on checking and monitoring your mite levels, right? It is imperative to know how many mites are in your hive. There's some people that believe that you should check every month, and I don't disagree with that. I check April, July, August, September. I like to know what my mite level is coming out of winter, and I really like to know what's going on going into fall, right? Those are your danger times. June, July, you know, I've never really had a problem with mites in that time frame because they're so busy, they're growing so quick. But it's July, August, and September that you'll start getting into trouble if you're not monitoring your mites. If your levels are high, treat. Whatever program you're following or whatnot, make sure you're following it, the rules, directions of those treatments. There's 2 links in this deck. One is the Honeybee Coalition. The other one I like is the Pollinators resource. And they have good information on different treatment methods, how to check. The Pollinator one does a good job on the sugar roll. I don't think they cover the alcohol wash, but there's plenty of stuff out there. Make sure you know.
I like the sugar roll.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the sugar roll too. I know a lot of people have switched over to alcohol. It's more accurate, but I found the sugar roll works pretty well.
Yeah. And well, what I will also mention, I mean, coming into spring, is that Open Space, actually there on Coors, actually has a great program.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's good to know.
No, they have a great teaching program, and they bring in a lot of master beekeepers that come in and teach. And I went through the class with Les Crowder some 16 years ago at Open Space. So I'm just putting it out there for people who want to learn more. Look into that into the spring.
And since we were talking about it earlier, and somebody asked a question about formic acid, so in the spring, if I need a treat, I do use formic acid, and I use these Formic Pro strips. What I like about them is that they last longer. They'll last 2 years versus the other ones, and they just come in a package like this, and you come. I'm not going to open them because I really enjoy breathing, but they come in little packages like this, and you can open them up, and they're just strips about this size that you set on top of the hive. So if you have a multi-box hive, you put one on one box, you put one on the other box on top of it. Pretty straightforward and simple. In the fall, I tend to do.
John, if you want to show them something, you need to stop sharing your.
Oh, you guys aren't seeing? Okay.
We can't see it.
Oh, I'll show at the end. Remind me. Thank you. I thought you guys could see my video too. I apologize. I'll show you guys the formic acid stuff and the oxalic acid stuff at the end. All right. Check for diseases. So mites are not the only thing that can get your bees. There's a lot of other things that can go wrong. I have been fortunate that I haven't had to deal with a lot of these diseases. I know Amy has had some great experience with European foul brood, and she can talk a lot about that. But you need to be looking at your hive for things that look amiss. One thing I always do is when you get into a hive should smell a certain way, right? It should smell nice and pleasant. I have learned that if you have problems, whether you have high mite counts or some of these other diseases, you can start smelling things that are off. And if you start smelling like, wow, that doesn't smell right, start looking. What's going on? Why do you smell something funny? And so you want to look at the larvae. You want to make sure that they're pearly white. They're in a nice C shape. Everything looks good. If not, you'll start seeing different colors. They won't look quite as healthy. It could be chalk brood, sac brood, American foul brood, European foul brood, and really understand what each one of those means and how to identify them. That's a whole conversation on its own, but you really need to make sure you understand those. You want to look at your brood pattern. Does it look nice and dense and healthy? Is she covering the whole frame? Are there a lot of gaps in there? You know, if you look at a frame of brood and you're seeing a bunch of holes, you know, cells without brood in it, and there's nothing in it, you're probably starting to see some signs, early on signs of heavy mite loads.
Or foul brood.
Or foul brood, yep. Do the bees look healthy? Are they fluffy and fuzzy? Are they, you know, they should look like healthy little bees. If they're shiny and sickly looking, something's going on. Do their wings look okay? Are you seeing deformed wings? Are you seeing K wings? You know, keep a lookout for all those things when you're doing your hive checks. Do you see signs of whack moth? That can be as obvious as, you know, like little cocoons, or your frames are getting eaten away. It gets pretty nasty. Or it can be, you can see sometimes on a frame of brood, you'll see a line going across where there's no brood in it. That's a sign that there's a wax larva that kind of ran underneath those brood and killed them. Typically though, wax moths, I've never heard of wax moths killing a hive. It's something else, and there's just a result of whatever happened. Look out for signs for other pests like mouse, ants, skunks, those sort of things. Typically, if it's a skunk, if you have a hive that's always been really gentle and easy to work with, and you go in one day in the fall and all of a sudden they get real aggressive, their temperament changed, something's going on, and I've found it to be a skunk. So down here is a link that you guys can click on that gives you really good references to a lot of diseases that are going on out there. Question?
I didn't know that about the skunk.
Yeah. That's one thing about Crowless is we have a lot of skunks.
I have a question about ants. If I see occasional ants on the outside of the box, is that something to worry about? I haven't seen any inside.
No, so I live in Crowless. I have a ton of those little black ants.
Yeah.
I see them in the hive all the time. Just, you know, 5 or 6 or 7. You know, they're not bothering the hive. I don't really worry about it. Some people get really worked up and they put oil around the bottom of their legs of their stands for their hives and whatnot. You know, if you're seeing some hives or ants on the hive or in the hive, it's not a big deal. If you have an ant problem, you'll know it. Like you'll see, like they can build a nest on the inner cover up top, right? And you open it up and there's ants everywhere. I've never seen that. I've seen pictures of it, but in general.
Well, I think if you have a weak hive, there's a tendency for that to happen. And what I do is I use cinnamon.
Yep, that's a good one. I forgot about that.
I just put it around the base, you know, and yeah, you might have to do it every few days, and if it rains, you'll have to do it again. But I put cinnamon and then start trying to feed the hive to kind of get them built up. But it's usually when you have a weak hive.
Yep.
I've got a lot of bees in the hive. It's just on the outside, not a lot, but I see them crawling every once in a while on the side.
I wouldn't worry about that.
I wouldn't worry about that at all. That's fine. Yeah. So again, this link here is a good link to go look at different disease types. They show you pictures of what they look like and what you should be looking for. So it's a good reference.
Yeah.
All right. All hail the queen. So every time you get in a hive, you should be looking at the queen. Is she healthy? Is she laying right? Does everything look good? Right. And someone once told me early on that every time you should go in a hive, you should think there's something wrong with the queen. She's not okay, and make her prove to you she's okay. It's just a mindset, right? So do you see queen cells? Is there some issue? Do the workers think that they need to raise a new queen? Always keep an eye out for that. Not queen cubs, queen cells, big difference. Is the queen laying, right? And is she laying in a nice pattern? Like if you look at this frame in this picture, that's a beautiful brood pattern, right? That's the kind of thing you want to be looking for. Nice, solid brood patterns. Occasional holes like this are fine. It can be for various reasons. Is she laying 1 egg per cell? You know, look in those cells and see the eggs. If you're seeing 2, 3, there could be something wrong with her. You could have a laying worker, could be a bunch of different stuff. And are you seeing a bunch of drones? Is she laying a lot of drones? Particularly this time, you know, going into the fall, you should not see that. And if you're seeing that, then there's something wrong. Be lookout for a lot of those things. Reduced space is a big deal with the layings. You know, Michael Bush says a strong colony is merely a colony with good density of bees, and I think that's true. When you open a Langstroth and you look inside the box, you should see bees packed in there. You should be nice and dense. Now, if you're seeing a lot of bearding and they look overcrowded, that's one thing, but you want them to be full. You want to see bees in between every single frame. You don't want to see them just in the middle. You don't want to see them, you know, scarcely between boxes. So you want to manage that density. I know we were talking earlier about how the bees don't heat the hive, they heat the cluster. That's true. But if you've ever been outside on a cold day and you walked into a building that's not heated, that's on a cold day, there's a difference, right? So the smaller space that they have does help them a lot, in my opinion. So manage the hive so that, you know, you're keeping that space down. You do that by removing the empty supers. Anytime you see a hive struggling, compress them, right? Get them down as much as possible. If I have a hive that started getting, you know, weak, or there's something going on I can't understand, I'll start reducing them down as much as I can to give them a little bit of advantage. And it's surprisingly how well that works. Reduce the hive to the right size for that hive. Too much space, again, is easier for the pests to get in. It's harder for them to manage. It's more space they got to take care of. You know, wax moths and get a handle, that sort of thing. I follow the 80% rule, right? So when you look into a box, you should see a ton of bees in between at least 80% of those frames, right? If not more. If they're getting too dense in the spring, you expand up. If they're getting too less than that, reduce down in the fall. Watch for that chimneying effect where you have just bees in the middle of the box and you keep adding or reducing. You want to make sure they fill all the way out to the edges. Combine weak colonies in the fall or this time of year that are too small into bigger hives. So if you have a really weak hive that's having a hard time, maybe that queen's having a hard time, kill her, combine it with a good hive or a weaker hive. Make sure the brood nest is near the bottom of the hive, and rebalance frames. This is an important one. We talked about this cluster earlier and the importance of it. One thing we didn't talk about is in that brood nest, you want to make sure that you have empty cells. Because when they form that cluster, they go inside, so the bees will go inside the cells to dense in or pack in more densely. So if you were to, for example, take your bees out and just put solid frames of honey in a hive going in the winter, you think they'd be great. They would probably die because they can't form that dense ball. They need empty cells to go into and form that ball. I hope that makes sense. So you want to make sure that that brood nest is near the bottom, that there's empty frames for them to get into, and that it's a good, healthy brood box for them.
So
Any
John,
questions?
yeah, I have a question. Can you explain how you're saying reduce the size of the hive? How do you do that?
Take boxes off, right? So let's say, you know, honey supers are easy, right? You harvest the honey, you take the supers off. If I run all mediums, so I don't run deep. So if I have, say, 4 mediums in a hive and I go in and I think the population is low, what I'll do is I'll take that top box off, I'll set it aside, and I'll start going through the hive, you know, the other mediums. I'll look for empty bars or, you know, bars that are just comb, and I'll move resources from that one medium into the other box. So I'll start condensing down and moving resources until I finally free up that box. But again, make sure you leave empty frames for them to lay in and to cluster in.
Thanks, John.
What I like about Michael Bush, and he has a great book called Practical Beekeeping, by the way, and he spoke at one of the meetings in Albuquerque, is he does in his what do you call it? He does frameless, doesn't use the
foundation
plastic. Yeah, he doesn't use the foundation. I mean, and his book is actually pretty good. And what's really cool about him too is that you can go to michaelbush.com and he will answer any of your questions.
Yeah, he's a fantastic resource.
He's a fantastic guy.
Yeah.
So, and I was really glad that I went to the meeting in Albuquerque some years ago where he came and talked. But yeah, he's a good one.
Any other questions on reducing space? Okay. Getting near here. I don't know how much time I have, Lulu. I don't want to go too long here. The next thing is to reduce the entrance as you start going into the fall. So it helps them defend against predators like wasps. It helps them defend against robbing. It keeps the mice out in the winter, and it overall kind of helps reduce stress on the hive. So, as you go in, usually these bars that you see here, like this pink one, when you go in the winter, you start with the fully open in the summer, then you put the longer opening when this time of year, and then you flip it eventually over to the smallest opening before you go into winter. And so just keep reducing it down as you reduce the box down. The important note is also they go a certain way. So if you look on the right of this picture here, you'll see that the entrance, like the little bar for the entrance, is on top, and over here it's on the bottom. It's meant to go on the bottom. A lot of people put them on the wrong way. And the reason being is if you have a die-off or you have a bunch of bees that die in the winter and they fill the bottom of that your bottom board or your screen board down here, they can block the entrance. So if you flip them over, if you have dead bees or debris down at the bottom, they can still get out. So make sure you put them this way. Just a little nuance there.
And then they will take them out.
Yeah.
They'll take the dead bees out.
Exactly.
So John, take your time. You have a lot of information. We will go as long as you have information in this question. So
Okay.
you don't have to rush.
Cool. And here's the example of the different sizes if you're not familiar with entrance reducers. So you kind of have 3 settings in both of them. The first one is no bar at all in the entrance. You have a full open entrance, which is great in June, May timeframe if you have a strong hive. As you start getting closer to fall, you'll see this second one here, which is about a third of the entrance. That is the second setting per se. And then finally you have this little small opening and you just turn the bar and then you'll get the different ones. So that small entrance is the one you'd want to use going into winter, like October.
So I have a quick question. I inherited this hive. The hive was swarmed into an empty box that someone couldn't keep, and so they brought it here. It has a round hole for an entrance. And how would I retrofit that? Is there any way to do that with this type of?
Is it in a top bar or a Lang?
It's a Lang.
So is it just a round hole in one of the boxes? I would just leave it. So I drill holes about the size of a wine cork in a lot of my boxes, like right below the handle. If you can see my mouse, right here below the handle. I typically do that to help with ventilation. It gives them another entrance when you get into bigger hives. And also in the winter, it gives them a second entrance. If they don't like it, they'll seal it up with propolis.
So where do you put the extra entrance or holes?
Can you see my mouse?
I saw it. Oh yeah, now I see it.
I typically drill the hole right here, about 5/8 inch thick, or around, if I can remember right. But it's right below the handle, is where I stick it.
And that you do that in lieu of having this slotted in?
No, you have both. So if you have a hive box that has that hole there, it's fine. Don't worry about it. In the winter, if you think it's bothering them, you can usually plug them up with a wine cork, seal it up. But if the bees don't want it, they'll seal it up. They'll propolize it. I let them manage it.
Okay, thank you.
Which gives the hive ventilation, right? So the 3 biggest reasons that I see a hive die in the winter is high mite levels, almost always. That's the #1 reason. Not enough food, so they didn't have enough food going in the winter for some reason, or moisture, right? So the reason the moisture is a problem is they form a cluster, that ball inside of the hive, and they heat it up to 98 degrees. That heat rises up to the top of the lid, And if it's cold outside, you have cold and heat. What happens? Condensation. And that water condensates on the top of the lid there and rains down on the bees. And once those bees get wet in the winter, it's over. They don't have a chance. There's nothing they can do. And so that moisture control is important. There's a couple different ways you can do that. First and foremost is good ventilation. So that top box you have it there, you can drill a hole in the top of it. It's not going to hurt them as long as you don't have strong winds in your area, and they'll propolis it if they don't like it. You can do that. I've done that. It works fine. You can put a moisture control box on the top of the hive, often called dadent boxes, and basically you put like wood chips or something like that in that box, and there's a screen bottom board. If you go research that, you'll see how to do it. And it's basically just a wicker. It absorbs the moisture in the air and provides a little bit of insulation between the bees and the top lid. You can insulate that top lid to kind of help prevent it, and you can also just stick a burlap bag on the top in between the inner cover and the top lid, and that acts as a moisture absorber. So there's a couple of different ways you could do it. I like insulating that inner cover, a lot like Mark did with his top bars. I think that just helps with that temperature differentiation between outside and inside. But ideally, you know, the inner cover helps with it as well, but ventilation is critical, in my opinion. Questions?
This is what I have. That's the front of my hive, my box.
Oh, that's a good bearding. That's nice.
It's heavily bearded. They made like a cone on the side at one point, but you can't really see it, but right there is the entrance. And I'd say it's more than 5/8 in diameter. It might almost be an inch, but.
Yeah, just it's kind of hard to tell in that picture. I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, if they didn't like it, they would seal it up with propolis.
Okay.
You do have a lot of bees. Typically this time of year, you get some bearding because it's hot, and also because the bees are bored, right? There's not a lot of nectar sources, so they tend to hang out, and you get that washboarding and stuff like that. That's a lot of bees, though. I would go inside your hive, and if you're seeing each of your boxes really packed during the day, even when they're bearding like that, you might want to consider adding another box right now and see if they start filling it up.
Well, I did add a box about 10 days ago on top because it was really packed with bees. I had a friend, Matt Kuchar. He came by to help me with this because I'd never done it before. Anyway, we thought it might be a good idea to add an extra box, and that's what we did. So I'm planning on checking it in like another week. He's going to come by again and hold my hand, but
That's perfect. That's exactly what you should do. I mean, because it's possible you could get another flow going, right? We've had a lot of good rain in some areas right now. Things are going to start blooming. We might get a nice fall flow. So you want to make sure they have the room to store if they do. So keep an eye on that.
okay.
All right.
John, in response to Adrian's comment, is it too late in the season to do a split? If the population is really high in the hive?
So good question. I typically don't do splits after July, right? This is getting pretty late.
Okay.
I would say if you have a couple hives in the area and you see drones, you're still seeing drones, you theoretically could do a split. Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know what your success rate would be. I haven't really done them this late before. I typically stop doing splits about early July. I don't know. Does anybody else have any experience doing splits after this?
A lot of people do make up nukes, and there's a lot of, like in the journals, you will see people making up nukes, not so much for space issues or overcrowded hives, but because overwintering, they want to overwinter those nukes. Like John Gagne does that, and I think Michael Bush talks about it. A lot of people are doing that now just because it's a small colony. They're sometimes, they'll pack 4 of them together on a pallet, to keep warm. And And then they sell those nukes in the spring. So anyhow, there's a bunch of information out there about making up nukes around this time.
Okay.
A lot of those people raise their own queens too. You do have to, just make sure that you've got a mated queen in there by fall. But the other point I wanted to say, John, was that that in top bars in particular, you do see a lot of them raising drones in the fall. And that's precisely because a lot of colonies that haven't had a chance to swarm in the spring often will send an old queen off, or decide to swarm in the fall. And so there's a lot of colonies that raise drones, at least in top bars. It may not be so common in langs just because unless you're putting, drone foundation in there. But it's very common. Almost every colony that I've ever had has raised drones in the fall if they're a good size.
Yeah. I agree, Kate. I think it's excellent, but I don't see a reason why you couldn't do it now. I don't. Keep in mind, to do a split, you need, and if you're gonna let them raise their own queen, you need 23 days. So keep that in mind, right? So 23 days from now is, August, you're fine, but you start getting in September and stuff like that, 23 days out could start having some impacts. You might not see the drones when she needs to go out on a mating flight, but yeah, that's good information, Kate. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I'm up in Santa Fe too, so and we've had very little rain, a lot more issues than you guys, but
hopefully you guys get some rain.
So yeah.
All right. Any other questions on hive ventilation? Hopefully that's helpful. All right. Other items to think about in general, right? So this is kind of my brain dump. Couple slides here. Make sure the hive is protected from wind and moisture, right? So if you live in a windy area, you got to be thinking about, okay, if there's cracks or the entrance and it's really windy, they may form a cluster, but if the wind's able to get into that hive and kind of roll around, it can give them grief, right? So make sure they have good protection from the wind. Be aware of your land as well. So if you live someplace, you got a lot of land and you have a low spot in your property, particularly if you have, moisture on your property, moisture likes to settle on those low spots. So not typically a good place to keep bees. You want to keep them up high, like on a hill, or not, not directly on the hill because of the wind, but, out of those low spots and out of the wind. If you use integrated pest management boards at the bottom of your hive, good time to take them out and clean them off, get them kind of ready for winter. Bees still need water during the winter, right? We get warm days, they need to go out and drink. So make sure if you're in a dry area that you have some water source for them, even through the winter. It's also, from what I understand, they use moisture to help heat the hive and cool the hive. Block hives from the wind and moisture. That's a little bit redundant. I apologize about that. But, I don't know a lot of people who do wraps around here. I know you get up in, Michigan and whatnot, a lot of people wrap their hives with tar paper and whatnot. I know here in Albuquerque, I don't think I've ever heard anybody wrapping their hives. I don't know in the East Mountains if people do that. It gets pretty cold out there. Amy or anybody can comment, or Kate, do you do that? Do you wrap your hives or anything up in the Santa Fe area? I don't think anybody does it. No. I really don't think. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about moving a hive. I understand it can really mess up. You don't want to do that, I guess, when it's active. Can you move a hive that's active?
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't move a hive in the dead of winter by any means. If it's super cold, below 50, I would leave them alone. But this time of year, when you're above 50, 60 degrees, yeah, you can move them. That's a whole other topic, but you want to seal the entrance off like at night and then move them super early in the morning before it gets hot, because the hive can overheat. But this is the whole conversation. But you need to move them at least 2 miles. Is the other caveat there.
2 miles?
Yeah, at least.
Or you can move them about 4 feet a day, just,
Oh, really?
But, just the foragers will go back to the original spot. They'll be confused. They'll fly around, waste a lot of time. Then by the evening, they'll have found their way home. But that's about the limit,
I see.
supposedly, like 4 to possibly 10 feet. But where you end up with problems is you're trying to move them on the other side of your house or whatever. So
Right.
you can do it sort of systematically, but if you absolutely had to for safety reasons, you can move them. But when you open up the entrance that next morning or whatever, put a branch in front of it, like maybe a juniper branch or something that they've got to really climb over and figure out what the heck is that, and then they reorient.
Oh, wow.
You lose a lot fewer
Yep.
foragers.
Have you done that, Kate? Does that work?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hey, John,
I've always
Where
wondered
are they gonna go? They got nowhere to go, so they'll fly around, but eventually they will they'll find their hive. They've got nowhere else to go. So usually by the end of the day, they will have figured it out. So.
I've never.
I also,
Go ahead.
I also take like a clump of grass. If I'm going to move it in my yard, like after a split, I shove a clump of grass in there. It takes them a few hours. They're pulling it in. I'll find a bunch of grass inside the hive, but they orient again, just like Kate said. There's like, what's going on here? Where am I? So then they'll orient again if you keep them in there for a while, or make them climb through clumps of the little blades of grass.
So, hey, John, I'm up here in Santa Fe, and I was just going to add that I do actually put an insulation jacket on my Langstroth hives. I have something called a bee cozy they make, and it's nice. It just slips right over the 2 double deeps, and that seems to work. It might be a little extra insurance. I mean, I do actually run with screen bottom boards, and then I have an insulated top cover. But the jacket seems to work really nicely, and it does kind of block the wind as well.
Nice. It's good to know. If you do choose to insulate, make sure you keep that ventilation going. Don't seal it up so tight that you're trapping all that moisture in there. That's the one caveat with that.
I actually made some windbreaks so that I'm not using a whole lot of straw, because the straw sometimes can get really wet in the winter when we have snow, when and if we have snow. And I just put it in front of my hives, and it's these little X frames, and at a later date when we have another meeting, I'll take pictures of what those are, and I'll post those. But they work really, really well to help protect the hives.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. That's great.
Yeah, no, they're real, and I used it from scrap wood I'm in the film industry, and I used it from wood that they were about to throw away. So they're pretty cool.
That's cool.
You know Liz Marshall?
Yes.
Yes. She lives near here where I live.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a set decorator in film. Have been doing it for over 35 years.
Wow, great.
Grew up
That's
in
awesome.
Taos. Yeah, grew up in Taos.
That's awesome. All right. Next thing is to remove weeds and other hiding places for mice around your hive. So, just kind of like cut down the weeds, make sure everything's nice and clear around the hive. Just generally a good idea all year round, in my opinion. Secure hive covers with ratchet straps going into winter, just in case we get really windy in the winter. Just wrap it around the hive, make sure that lid stays on.
Okay.
If that wind were to blow off in the winter, it would be a death sentence for that hive.
Don't they get a little bit testy in the winter? I mean, as we get into the fall too?
I think my experience is as long as you get in on nice days and you're going kind of middle of the day, I haven't really had a problem with them getting testy. I've gone in as late as October and haven't had a problem.
Yeah,
I don't know if
I had one hive that got really, really testy. So it's like, whoa. Dude.
I've always found that if you have a hive that's really gentle and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later it's real aggressive, something's going on. There's something wrong. A skunk's getting into it, maybe a mouse is getting, I don't know, something's going on that's agitating them, and you want to figure that out.
Right.
This time of year is also a good time to start thinking about, Jess talked about keeping notes. It's important to keep notes. And when you go into the hives, if you see a box that's maybe cracked, or you got a hot box that started to warp for some reason, and you're getting gaps in between your boxes, make a note of it, make a plan to get that fixed. You want to get all that taken care of before you go into winter. You want a nice solid hive. Remember to remove the queen excluder going into winter. If you're going to leave a super on and you use queen excluders, do not leave it on during the winter. What happens is the bees, that cluster can move up, and then they go through that queen excluder up where the honey is, and that queen is left behind. She can't get through it. You will kill that hive. So make sure you remove the queen excluder going into winter.
Does everyone, is it recommended to use a queen excluder?
That depends on who you ask. I don't. I haven't never used queen excluder. I hate them. I don't like them. Some people swear by them. So it's something you got to figure out for yourself, and how you manage your hives and stuff like that. A lot of people think they're fantastic. I don't like them.
Yeah, I've seen the.
Does anybody have any experience with a flow hive super? You use a queen excluder so that the queen doesn't get up into the honey super and lay eggs. And so what would you do in that case?
I have a flow hive. I don't use a queen excluder. I just make sure that there's a gap. So the way I manage that hive is I have the brood box. Then I'll add a regular medium on for honey. And when they fill that up, I'll add the super or the flow hive on it. And that kind of buffers the queen from going up there. I mean, she might, and so you keep an eye on it. If she lays up there, don't draw the honey. I've never had a problem. I just think I don't like queen excluder. I just think they're a pain personally, but.
So you've got a stack that's 3 hive with the brood box on the bottom, and then a second box, and then the honey super on top.
Yep, that's how I do it.
Okay.
Add candy boards if you're low. You can't feed wet sugar syrup in the winter because of that moisture. If you're really low going into the fall, and you just absolutely need to feed those bees going into, say, October, November, you have to do that with a candy board. You can't do that with liquid feed, in my opinion, because you're just putting moisture. You're just asking for trouble. And then finally, once it gets cold and you enter that winter, leave them alone as much as possible, in my opinion. Don't want to go in there and look at them. Don't knock on the side to see if they're in there. Maybe go out there and sweep the snow off the entrance so they can get out. But my opinion, leave them alone.
A heart thermostat actually helps to put on the side of the box.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You know what I mean? You just put it on the side of the box and you can hear them.
All right. Any questions? All right. I'll show you what I was trying to show you earlier. So these are, I use Formic Pro for formic acid. They come in a box like this. You can order them from a couple different places, and they just come in a pack like this, and then individually they're just little strips like this. Again, I'm not going to open this because I like to breathe. So you just tear this open. There's 2 in here, and then you put them in the hives. You need to follow the directions. There's temperature requirements and whatnot for when you use it. You can't just use it anytime you want. I think they work really well. I only use them in the spring. In the fall, I use oxalic acid. And I just got this. I'll show you guys this. It's a little fumigator. So what you do is you have a little scoop, which is the recommended amount per brood box, and you put it in the lid. And then you put the lid on the top of the thing, and then there's a burner that goes in here that you screw in, and then when you're ready to do it, you just flip it over, and it heats it up, and it fogs it out of it, so you're able to just fog it, so you're not sticking that hot plate into the langs, which always worries me that you're going to burn that hive down. It's called a gas vap, and the nice thing is this is like $40. It's actually cheaper than one of those hot plates, and it works awesomely well. So I do that in the fall, typically do a treatment every 7 days. I it works really well. I haven't lost a hive from varroa mice since I've started treating them with oxalic acid. And
Is there an organic way of treating the hives?
There are several organic ways. I mean, one would argue that formic acid and oxalic acid are organic. They're plant-based. You know, like for example, formic acid is what hurts when a bee or an ant bites you, right? That's what's actually the pain is formic acid. And oxalic acid, if I remember correctly, I might be wrong, or this comes from like broccoli. And so they're naturals. Now there's hard chemicals and other options as well, but we can go over that another time.
Yep.
Yeah, there actually is naturally oxalic acid in honey. If you analyze honey, you will actually find oxalic acid. I'm a chemist. It's a natural product. So even though it sounds like a chemical, it is actually a natural product. And John's right. Formic acid is actually the liquid that's in a bee sting or an ant bite.
Or an ant.
So they are natural products. Forma is the Latin word for ant.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Well, and if Les Crowder mentioned that one of the things that bees really hate is banana peel.
Pretty cool.
So, I mean, if you lay a banana peel, if you have a Langstroth or a top bar, you can lay a banana peel on the top bar, and that will also kind of throw a lot of the stuff down. So Kate can actually mention to this. Kate actually should speak to this because she knows more than I do.
What it is the smell of mad bee, the pheromone that they release when they're angry smells like bananas. So it doesn't have anything to do with mites. It has to do with the pheromone, the angry bee pheromone. So I've never heard Les talk about as any kind of mite treatment. So,
I can tell from experience, if you eat a banana and go out by your hives, they will sting you. It actually is true.
All right, well.
So, John, are you going to talk more about the mites and the mite treatment and when to treat?
That's up to Lulu. I wouldn't mind doing that, but I don't know if somebody else is on docket for that. So I'll leave that up to Lulu, but I'd be more than happy to if you guys want.
Because I have a couple questions about mites that I've done a couple of tests, and the first test that I did back in May, I didn't have any mites. And then I just did a test using an alcohol wash, found 4 mites out of a sample of 271. And so that would be, 1.4 mites per 100, I guess.
Yeah.
That's how I would calculate that. So is it time to treat or not?
Anything above 3, you should start coming up with a plan, in my opinion.
Anything above 3 mites?
Yeah, that was, my memory serves me right. That's the level that you should start getting concerned. I will say this, and this will probably upset some people. I've been doing this for 5 years. And it used to be, I wouldn't treat, and I tried to do other things. And then about 2 years ago, I started treating with oxalic acid, and I had a lot of success, but I would only treat above 3 mites per 100. This last summer, or this last winter, I had 7 hives go into the winter. I treated 4 of them. They survived. The 3 that I didn't treat had no mites or like 1 or 2 low levels. All 3 of those hives died.
Oh, I had 4 mites out of 271. So.
Okay, it's 3 mites per 100 is the threshold that they recommend.
Yeah. So I have 1.4 mites per 100.
But
keep in mind.
Remember, every month, mites they expand or they breed, and their numbers become exponential, logarithmic. Yep. So if you have 1.4, then it's 2.8 next month,
right?
And then it's 9, and then it's 27.
I get that. I'm just wondering when I treat. Is now the time to treat, or should I wait?
In September, John, what about in September, at the end of September, if I have 2% in September, I treat.
Yeah.
Because that 2 becomes 4, 16, whatever, 156 or whatever. So yes, thank you. So I have a question. Someone, her audio isn't working. And she wants to know, she has a 2% now, and she wants to know if she should treat 2% now. But she will continue to test next month and the after.
So
anyway, what do you think?
My personal opinion is, one, if you have your honey supers on, you take care of that first, right? There are some treatments that you can do with the honey supers on. I don't think a lot of them can be done now. At 2%, I would start being concerned, and here's the reason why. You guys can see my screen, right? So this is from my presentation. So as you look at the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, your hive builds up, right, in the spring, and you get really big in mid-summer, right around, like Jessie was saying, June, July timeframe. That's at the peak, right? Your mite levels, if you've been treating and they were low in the spring, aren't very high at this point, right? They're just starting to come up because they're doubling every 30 days roughly is how the mites work. And what happens, and so your hive's strong, everything looks great. You'll say, you hear it all the time, I had this amazing hive. It was 10 stories tall and had 1 million bees in it, right? And it died. Well, the reason being is because that many bees produces that many mites, right? They are just, those mites are going crazy in those big hives. And then when that hive starts reducing down, going into the autumn and winter time frames, your varroa mites get up. And what happens is you get to this point where you have a huge 1-to-1 almost ratio of mites to bees. And it's over, and that'll happen quick. It's amazing how quick that happens, because your hive's dropping down population, the mites are going up. You will do a hive check, and you'll have 2% this time of year, and you're thinking, oh, I think I'm fine. You'll check that hive in August, and you'll see 34, 40 mites at the end of August. It happens quick because, again, those mites are doubling every 30 days. Your bee population is going down, and you start getting to this point where you have a tipping point, and the hive almost can't survive. I think there's some tricks you can do, but you get into a bad situation. So my opinion, if your honey supers are off and you're this time of year and you have mite levels, it's not a bad time to start doing some treatments.
Okay, so even if it's not in my level where I've got I had 4 mites for 271, I could treat, take my super off, which doesn't have any honey in it right now anyways. Yep. And then treat with, I've got oxalic acid, so treat now and then test again in August, in a month.
So, okay, this starts to get a whole conversation here. You got to know your treatment method, right? So each treatment type has a knockdown percentage, right? I think I have a slide on this. I wasn't ready to do this, so I apologize. So your treatment has a knockdown percentage. For example, if you do oxalic acid right now, you probably have a fair amount of brood in that hive. Oxalic acid isn't going to touch the mite in those sealed brood cells. It's not. So maybe you have 50% of the mites out of the cells and then 50% being reared, and use oxalic acid. You'll knock your mite count in half. Great, you'll think everything's great. 30 days later, it'll be right back where it was. And so if you're treating, for example, with oxalic acid and you have sealed brood, you have to do 3 treatments, 1 every 7 days, is the recommendation. So you got to understand the different, where is it? Here it is. The different types of treatments and how much of the varroa they kill. Some will treat or kill the mites in the brood cells, some won't. Some will only have an impact, for example, the sugar, if you dump powdered sugar on the hive, will only kill, I think it's like 5% of the mites. So you'll get that level back within 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of complicated, but my point being is you have to know your mite levels, you have to know how your treatment works, and then you have to monitor at the end of your treatment to see where your levels are, and you'll know where you sit. That's a Reader's Digest version of kind of some of the stuff I cover in the mite program.
All right. So it's not too early to treat,
yep.
I guess.
Yep. Sorry.
Okay.
Again, John, you gave that Honeybee Health Coalition that has a great little, it helps you, walks you through what you have and what will work for you.
Yep.
That's really helpful. And that's on our website
Yep.
too. That button. Yeah, there you go.
Here's some other good resources if you guys want to click on those or take a picture of that as well. All right. Thanks, Lulu. I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, John and Mark and Jessie. And this was a great meeting, lots of excellent information. We did record this, so Randy will put it on the website. When do you think you can get it on there, Randy?
It'll be on there sometime tonight. It just takes a while to
So,
process.
again, it was a lot of information. Do a lot of scientific reading, American Bee Journal, bee culture, you know, talk to people who have success where their hives do survive the winter and what they are doing. So other than that, thank you everybody for coming, and don't forget we need some volunteers, 3 to 5 people for the advisory board, so keep it in mind.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you.
You.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.